I'm your Jesus-loving and potty host, L.A. Sprague. Welcome to Christians with Chronic Illnesses. Cindy Washburn, thanks so much for being on Christians with Chronic Illnesses. We really appreciate it. Cindy is, for the audience listening, so we interviewed Miles Washburn, Miles for GBS, who has Guillain-Barre syndrome, and he's doing a fundraiser, riding up a mountain, fundraising for current patients with GBS as well. And I thought that it would be really cool to hear a caretaker's perspective on the show. So if you're listening, I hope that you are encouraged. And also, if you're a caretaker and feel like you need a place to share your side of the story, or if you and the person you caretake would love to be on the show together, I'd be more than happy to talk about giving you guys a space to chat about that. But I'm super happy to have you today, Cindy. I think that you and Miles are incredible. And when I had asked Miles if there's anyone he thought that would be, encouraged being on the show, he was like, you have to have my wife. He immediately was like, I'm pulling her right now.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's very sweet.
So, Cindy, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Well, Miles and I have been married now 9 years. And, everything is, I'm just going to jump right in with
Yeah.
this. Everything, is going great. And he finally decided to retire. So, you start making all these plans and trips and things like that you want to do. And, that's the life, the road that you're going down. And then all of a sudden, you have what I call an interruption. You know, I think back to Jairus in the Bible, where he went to hear Jesus preach. He's a leader in the synagogue. And he's standing there to hear Jesus preach, and someone from home comes to him and says, your daughter is dying. And so he's, just very, upset and scared. And so he goes, makes his way through this huge crowd to get to Jesus. And he falls at Jesus' feet and said, please come heal my daughter. Jesus was like, okay, you have the faith. So absolutely. So they start going through this huge crowd. And then all of a sudden, Jesus stops. Someone touched his cloak, which is the woman that bled for 12 years. So Jarius had this interruption going on in his life, and he's just like, what, which is what I was doing. What's going on,
Mhm.
And that is what happened with us. All of a sudden, you're seeing, a loved one who is having these symptoms where he can't move, where he can't swallow, and the stress that you have, when you don't know the stress level, it's just a whole new level because you don't know what's going on. So, we start this whole process of going down this road trying to figure out what was going on. And so going back, to the story of Jairus, he's just like, Jesus, what are you doing? Why, pretty much have you interrupted going to my house to heal my daughter? And I kind of felt myself saying, God, what's going on here? We were going to do this, we were going to do that, and then it was like God says, I know what's going on. I'm ahead of you. I None of this is outside of my control. Just rely on me. Trust me. Which, in the end with Jerry's story, his daughter she died and Jesus brought her back to life. So with me, with this story, with about Miles, where we are today and what we have been through has just been amazing, and how we have just relied on God to get to where we are today. So, all of that being said, as a caregiver, the stress and the anxiety that you have in addition to what your spouse or your loved one is going through is just over the top.
Yeah. Sounds like it. So I would love you to expand more on, so you're talking about how you relate to Jarius, how his life was, well, probably already interrupted with his daughter, being sick and dying, but then also, with Jesus stopping and then her actually passing and then Jesus rising her. Wild story.
Yes,
But I
yeah.
would love to hear a little bit more about that beginning of before it was interrupted. What was, you mentioned that, you were asking God, like, what's happening? Like, there was stuff we were wanting to do. What was you and Miles's life and plans before he got sick?
Well, travel. We were wanting to do, a little bit more traveling than what we had done. We have a mountain house, and so we were looking forward to, spending more time up there. Him fishing and me hiking. So just a lot more time doing things that we've always wanted to do because he and I both have worked all of our lives. And so we finally get to this point of where you're retiring and you're going to maybe get to enjoy life, sleep in a little bit later, and all those fun things that you don't get to do when you're working. And so that's where we were, at the time when this, GBS hit him, just spending more time together. And, it just threw us for a loop when this hit
Yeah.
because it really did disrupt our lives, and it still has to a certain point.
hmm Yeah, so what was the time frame between when Miles retired and between the GBS hitting?
If I'm not mistaken, I think he retired in 24,
Okay.
and then February of 25 is when he got hit with GBS.
Wow. And
Yes,
when are you retired as well?
I am.
Okay.
Yes.
And when did you retire?
I had retired before Miles, so I've been retired now 4 years.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's such a unique struggle because you were finally at the point of you were working, you're retired, and Miles is retiring. You have dreams. All right, we're going to travel. We're going to finally, like, it's almost like it's that whole kind of expectation that we have, I think, especially as Americans. I don't know how it is other places, but we work when we're young, and when we really can, for the hope that someday we'll get to finally rest and do what we really enjoy. So you were really looking forward to that. And just maybe a year goes by, and all of a sudden you're hit with, well, Miles was hit with a chronic illness, and you were hit with having to kind of take a caretaker role. So that's
Yeah.
a very difficult, it sounds very difficult to navigate that.
Well,
Disappointing.
yes. Well, and the difficult part, though, was not knowing what was going on. Like I said, that's where your stress goes to a whole, different level.
hmm
But once he was diagnosed, then you're like, okay, we've got something we can work with now. So let's work with what we know at this point.
Right. Yeah. So I know that in Miles' interview, he talks about that it happened pretty quickly, that he was pretty healthy until one day, and it seems like the GPS just kind of hit him pretty hard. So, in your perspective, was that the same perspective that one day it kind of just hit, or did you see signs leading up to that? Thank you so much for spending your precious time with Christians with Chronic Illnesses. Your support means more to us than we can even describe. If you have a desire to donate or join a subscription for Christians with Chronic Illnesses, please see links in the show notes below.
Well, he had actually gone to our mountain house because we had had a tree that had fallen in the driveway because of snow and ice. So he had gone up there. And he called me on the way home and said, I have a lisp. So when he was talking, he had a lisp. And he's like, I don't know, what's going on. He said, I think I just need to come home because he was going to spend the night. So, he came home and I heard him, when he was trying to talk. And I'm like, you need to get to your doctor, and see what's going on. But you really don't think much about it at that point because it's nothing that's really, I guess, catastrophic at that point.
Hmm.
And then after having come back from the doctor, they were like, well, you may have been allergic to something or whatever. So we just kind of let it go. But then it got to where he's like, we were trying to eat dinner. And he's like, I can't swallow. I'm like, what do you mean you can't swallow? And he said, I can't swallow. Okay, okay, we're going to the ER then.
Hmm.
And that's where it all started at that point, all the stress and emotions and everything that kick in as a caregiver. Of course, he's already stressed, you
Right.
know, and, just, having all kinds of issues. And you as the wife, the spouse, you're getting anxious and that's not going to help them, but you can't help it you
Right.
know and so then is when I have to look back, like Psalms 56:3, where it says, when I was afraid, I put my trust in you. And that's what I had to do in my mind, because at first you're just, you don't know what to do. And that's where in my mind I had to say, okay, God, you know what's going on, you know the outcome of this. So I'm going to put my trust and faith in you. I'm going to rely on you. So, all during this process, when he's trying to be all anxious and stuff, you're trying to say, it's okay. It's probably not anything. It'll be fine. We'll get through this. God's got this. God's not going to let us retire and then something happen. And so, at the ER finally, and the doctor that was there obviously had not seen GBS before. And he just told Miles, you can swallow. There's no way you're not swallowing. You're swallowing. You're fine. And I said, listen, if my husband tells you that he cannot swallow, he cannot swallow.
Yeah.
Well, maybe he's just having an allergic reaction, blah, 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 blah. So they sent us home.
Wow.
Yes. So you can imagine where your anxiety and stress level is at this point, but imagine my husband's. It's over the top. And so we had been at the ER all day. And so I am give out. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to go lay down for just a moment, just to rest my eyes. But here's your phone.
Yeah.
I've got mine. If you need me, you call me. I hadn't laid down 2 minutes, I guess. And he called me. So I jumped up, ran into the living room, and was like, what's going on? He said, well, I really, could go to the restroom. I said, okay. He couldn't get out of the chair though. He could not get up out of the chair he was sitting in.
Wow.
So, I'm trying to help him by pulling on him to get him up. Well, he had no strength hardly in his legs and he hit the floor on his knees.
Mm.
So, of course, here goes our stress levels just, skyrocketing. And so we ended up getting a hard bottomed, straight back chair for him to pull himself up and me helping as well. I said, right then, we're going back to the ER. He said, well, pack me a bag because I have a feeling I won't be coming back home.
Mhm.
So that's when we ended up back at the ER and things just progressively got worse at that point.
Yeah. How did they get worse?
He got where he started getting numbness in his arms and his legs. We ended up putting him in a wheelchair, and just he just felt like, things were just getting worse by the moment.
Mhm.
So finally, they got him back into one of the ER rooms, and this time we had the chief of staff that was there as the doctor. And he looked at my husband and he said, "From what I'm seeing, it sounds like you've had a stroke." So they take him out, to go and do, what all the tests they needed to do. And I just sat there in that ER room praying, just praying, "God, you've got this. I know you do. You've got this." And you can't help but as a human to be emotional still, even though you know that God's got it 100%. The emotions just take over, and there's nothing you can do about it. You pray for calmness and peace and all of that, and God gives you that, and you deal with it and the anxiety kind of together. I know that it doesn't
Mhm.
sound, right, but it's just your human nature dealing with what God is doing in your life
Yeah.
in this situation.
Yeah, well, even Jesus had emotions.
Yes, yes, he did. Absolutely, he did. And I think, you're just like I said, it's just the anxiety just takes over.
Yeah.
And then seeing my husband being so scared.
Mm.
He looked at me at one point and he said, "I don't think I'm coming home." What do you think that does to your spouse, whenever you hear your other half say that? This is a man that God brought into my life. He literally brought Miles into my life. Was not looking for anyone. I'd had a marriage prior to Miles that unfortunately did not work out. And I said, "That's it. I'm done. I can live on my own. I'm fine." But and I told God, I said, "You know what? If there is anybody out there, you're going to have to bring them to me because I am not looking." So I know God brought Miles into my life.
Aw.
And to think that he thought that he would not be coming home and not survive this just broke my heart in two.
Mhm.
But again, my faith is strong, and I knew that God was going to handle it. I knew he was. One way or another, God was going to handle it for both of us. And just like with Jarius again, he healed Miles. He's always going to have GBS, but at least now he does not have any of the symptoms, that he did initially.
Yeah, thank God.
Yes, absolutely.
So, what were some of your thoughts and feelings as you progressively see Miles getting worse? First you see him have a lisp and then not swallowing, and then he's having numb limbs, and then he's at the point where he's telling you, "I don't think I'm going to come home." What are some of your thoughts and emotions that were going through you at that time?
Well, like I said, I mean, it was just so stressful. The anxiety, the uncontrollable tears, and you're trying to be strong,
For
for your
them, yeah.
you're trying not to cry in front of them. You're trying, not to be stressed. I'm just constantly saying, "Honey, it's going to be okay. God's got this. It's
Mhm.
going to be okay. He didn't put us together for something like this to happen right now. I just know He didn't. But inside, my insides are just churning. And I'm just praying, God, what is going on? What can I do? What can I say to my husband where, will help calm him, down, and he's just, so anxious and just thinking, "I'm not coming home. I don't know what's going on, all these things." And I'm trying to just be humble and kind and just, it's going to be okay, sweetheart. God's got this. Just keep praying. God's going to get us through this. And he did.
At any point, did you kind of doubt what you were saying, or did you like fully believe it the whole time?
I fully believed it. I really
Wow.
did. I fully believed it, even though I saw what Miles was going through.
Mm.
I just knew that, like I said, I knew God had put us together. And I just knew that God was going to pull him through this. I didn't know exactly how the outcome would be, whether there would be paralysis, permanent paralysis, whether there would be, any type of, symptom that he would carry forever, that maybe his speech, or he couldn't swallow. I mean, him not swallowing was the worst thing, because you don't realize how many times you swallow a day or in a minute. I mean, it's just something that we do that we
Right.
don't pay any attention to. And that was scary, because at first, when we got to the ER, he just had a handful of paper towels that he was, spitting in, because he couldn't swallow. And we were scared that he might aspirate or choke, or anything. We didn't
Right.
know what was going on. And then eventually in the ER, they gave him one of those little suction things like you have at the dentist office, where you're using when they're cleaning your teeth, or, whatever. He had one of those, and just kept the spit at bay by using, that suction tube.
Mhm.
And he had that until almost maybe the 2 days, well, maybe, no, maybe a day before we left the hospital. He was using that the whole time he was in the hospital. I mean, he couldn't eat. He didn't eat for 6 days. He couldn't swallow, so he couldn't eat. So eventually, they did have to put in a feeding tube so that he would get some nourishment. That day, when they did the feeding tube, is when I walked out of the room when they were doing it, and I literally broke down at that point.
Yeah.
That was because they couldn't get it to go in, and it was hurting him.
Oh.
And they were telling him to swallow. They want you to swallow to get it in. He's like, "That's why I'm here. I can't swallow." So that was just terrorizing to me. And, him being in pain, and I, like I said, I had to leave, and I just found a little corner, and I just wrote down. And it wasn't because of my lack of faith in what God was doing. It was just seeing my husband,
Yeah, in pain.
yes, hurting. That was the reason for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That makes total sense. I think it would be probably more concerning if you weren't feeling emotional about that.
Yes. Yeah.
Honestly.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, yes, it was a time, but and John, God doesn't promise us to be free from, pain and things like that. I mean, he tells us to expect tribulation, and so that's, kind of where I was with this, okay, God, again, you know, I was afraid, but I put my trust in you.
Mm, yeah. So in that moment when you broke down because you're experiencing the pain of the person that you love the most on this planet, did you reach out to anyone for help, or were you just praying, or were you just kind of trying to like control your physical reaction? Yeah, what did that look like in that moment?
When I found my little corner and just broke down, I just started praying, Lord, please let them be able to get that feeding tube in. And please, not let it hurt. Well, one tried to put it in, and then they took it back out because it got stuck. And then another doctor came in, and he finally got it in, but it was still difficult even the second time. But, for me, it was just praying that they would get it done so that he would not still, be hurting. And, at that point, his brother was, I'm keeping him up to date on what is going on. And so, when I could talk, I called him. And as soon as he answered the phone, I started again. I
Yeah.
couldn't even talk to him because I was so emotional.
Right.
And he was like, "Do you want me to come? Do you want me to come?" Because he lives up, in Massachusetts. And I was like, "No, no," because, my brother-in-law works at the hospital. So he was the one that was keeping us kind of, informed of things. I mean, he was amazing.
That's
It was amazing to
awesome.
have him there. And then finally, after I hung up with him and got myself together, went back around to where he was, and they had finally gotten the feeding tube in for him at that point. That was probably the hardest thing for me after the ER. Once they got him into ICU, his breathing, they had to monitor his breathing because they were going to put him on a ventilator. And he had to blow in this little apparatus to get to a certain point. And if he could keep blowing to that point, then they would not intubate him. And by the grace of God, he was able to keep doing that, and he did not have to be intubated, which, was our fear that that was going to happen.
What is that?
That is where they put the tube in him and it breathes for you, is what it
Wow.
does. Yeah. And because his breathing had become shallow, because everything is being attacked and everything has stopped, working, so to speak. He can't swallow. He couldn't even push the remote on the
Mhm.
TV. He couldn't lift up his arms, his neck when they would try and do the spinal tap and stuff and lay him back. They had to hold his head to lay him down because everything had started, paralysis was setting in.
Right.
And so that, you know, all of those things, combined, and with him, his breathing not being as strong as it could be, that was when they were saying, we're going, have to, intubate you, and put you on,
Ventilator?
ventilator. Yes, thank you. Because we thought they were going to have to do that. But like I said, we just kept praying, Lord, please, every time he would blow that little apparatus, please, Lord, let him, keep it up, keep it up. And he did. And again, we give God the credit for that as
Yeah.
well.
So it sounds like
Mm,
every small moment, every small thing that they had to do to help him, to check on him, you were in constant prayer of God,
yeah,
like help
yes,
him be able to pass this test, help them to be able to put this, in him peace like as peacefully as possible.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So for you, prayer was a huge part of being there for him.
Absolutely. And I got on the phone that night because I came home that night because we had two dogs. And I did not spend the night in the hospital. I was going to, but Miles was like, "No, you need to go check on the dogs and you let the dogs out and all of that." And so I did. But when I came home, I called every friend, every person that I could think of, all my prayer warriors to start praying. And LA, I know that is why my husband was able to walk out of that hospital like he did. We had prayer warriors everywhere, out of state, everywhere praying for my husband. And there's no doubt in my mind that that is what was there, because God is greater than the unknown and greater than what we are facing. He already knows the outcome of how it's going to be. So I think that was where I had my peace. What little bit I had was that knowing, that God's got this no matter what. I know that God has got this in one way or another. His will be done. It may not be ours, but it's going to be His will. And there was where my faith was and my trust was relying on him through it all.
Yeah. And Miles seems to be like kind of on that same page as you and also very open about his story. So I presume he probably was thankful that you were sending out prayer requests to a lot of people. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, he was. And he was even, sending some from his phone after he got where he could start using the phone. Was in ICU for I think 4 days or 5 days, and then they moved him to the step down unit. So at that point, he could start using the phone a little bit because he had had the IVIG plasma, which is what started, him getting better. And so when he could start using his phone,
Yeah.
he would, start telling people, pray, pray that I, can get over this, pray that, this will, this IVIG plasma will start working more so. And so he was definitely doing the same thing. And he and I were praying constantly together. I would not leave that room that we did not pray together, that, we know, Lord, you've got this. We know you do. You know, it was still very, very scary. And I think when you see a loved one with a sudden illness like this, I mean, the emotional, just, stress of it, the helplessness that you feel is is just beyond anything that you can ever think that you will have to go through.
Yeah.
And I know, there are a lot of caregivers out there that have to deal with a whole lot more than what I've had to deal with, and I think having God in your life is is the most important thing that you can do during something like this, is knowing that you have a personal relationship with God and that God's will is going to be done. And sometimes it may, as we know, it may not be the outcome that we want, but God knows what's best for all of us. And I think, just having my faith in God, having grown up with a grandmother that was a godly woman and my mom, who is a godly woman, and raised my sisters and I, to have a personal relationship with God. I mean, I thank them, both of them for that. And, as and this going through this, I think has just made my faith even stronger, that if you believe and you trust and you rely on God, that He is going to hear your prayers. I am a firm believer in prayer.
Thank you for your perspective on that. Well, I'm really glad to hear that you and Miles are on the same page when it comes to prayer and also with like, his openness to other people about his situation. I think for, caretakers and patients listening, at least for me, like a patient's perspective, it's so important for the caretaker and the patient to be on the same, you know, kind of wavelength regarding what information are we sharing? To who are we sharing it with? How are we feeling about asking for prayer and things like that? Because I know it can be like, I have a relative who loves to share prayer requests and such, and that's so appreciated because, for those of us who believe in prayer, that's very appreciated. On the other hand, though, there are plenty of Christians who believe in prayer who are more private people. And so to them, it can feel uncomfortable, having so many, whether it's like social media posts or text sent out, and it can almost feel like an invasion of privacy. So I'm so happy to hear that for you and Miles, you were on the same page and that was able to be something that didn't bring any point of tension or stress for you guys. And so I love that. And I highly encourage anybody listening, if you're, I don't know, a spouse or even a caretaker or whatever, just ask the person who you're, caretaking for, what is their preference? Do they prefer being more private? Are they okay with being an open book? Just see where they're at and pray for them and trust that God is hearing you, and hearing the integrity of you respecting their space as well. So I love that you guys had that, figured out and we're on the same page already. So that's awesome. I'm
Right.
and thanks for everybody who prayed for you guys in that season.
Yes.
For real.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you were in the hospital with Miles, was there at any point, I know that you were talking about that you had a lot of faith that, God had a good plan for you guys, and that's awesome. Was there any point where, when they were having to help feed Miles and things like that, was there any point that you were wondering, is this going to be our life from now on?
Absolutely, absolutely, because like I said, the unknown is the worst kind of fear and the
Yeah.
worst kind of stress, you know.
Yes.
Um, like I said, once you know, then you're like, okay, well, we can work with that. But when you don't know, that's the fear, not knowing what's going on, not knowing if the IVIG plasma is going to work, just the fear of, okay, is is this something that we're going to have to go to rehab for? Because a lot of patients do. They don't come home. They go straight to rehab or somewhere like that. Speech therapy. Were we going to have to do speech therapy? I mean, all these things, are going through your mind. But when you love someone, whatever you have to do for that person, you do. And I just, resolved to that fact that whatever I have to do for him, I will do with God's help.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Well, that's a perfect caveat because I would love to hear how your guys' lives are now. So, of course, with Miles' story, and again, for those of you listening, we interviewed Miles before. We highly recommend you go listen to his episode, Miles for GBS. It was great. He's awesome. But I would love to hear how your guys' lives have kind of changed and adjusted since the initial onset of GBS, because I know from your testimony and his as well that he's doing so much better, but he still has, fatigue and, as you mentioned earlier, maybe a little bit of anxiety. And he also mentioned like GBS mouth. Sometimes he can't quite like his mouth can't quite formulate what he's trying to say. So I would love for you to tell us on a day-to-day basis, what's your guys' life like now? Has it changed much since before GBS?
well, I'm going to revert back real quick to Jarius, where his daughter, lived. And for me, with our interruption with the GBS, we came out on the other side too. We've come out where Miles walked out of that hospital with just a cane. He could have come out in a wheelchair. He could have had to go to rehab, but he didn't. The doctor said he was the poster child for recovery of GBS. And again, we know why that is because of all the prayers. But our life day to day now, GBS not only affects the physical health side of it, it also affects psychologically. There is still anxiety, fatigue, nerve pain. But I think the hardest thing to cope with that Miles deals with is the fear of it coming back, the fear of it happening again. So a lot of times when he's having that fear, that's where we have to trust in God that it won't come back again. But we know that if it does, then there will be a reason for it. God will have a reason for it because I feel like that all of this has happened so that it strengthens our faith and it is enables us to tell others what happened and why we were where we are today. Now, on a day to day basis with Miles, it's kind of like Cracker Jacks. sometimes you don't know what you're going to get, meaning that he could wake up with anxiety and just, just his nerves, he's just very anxious that day. Or he could wake up with that sense of fear, and he talks about it. And so my job is to just comfort him and say, I understand, but we're going to believe that this is not going to happen again. But I think that is the biggest thing from day to day with him, is the fear of it coming back. He does have nerve pain certain days, and he feels like that he can't ride, bicycle that day. And, so he may elect not to ride that day. But again, it's not knowing each day how he is going to feel, his emotions, I guess. His emotions are probably the biggest change that I see since he's had GBS.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
how do you balance in your responses in those moments? Because as you said, you tell him, I understand, but we're going to believe for the best. How do you balance both having that empathy and meeting him where he is in that fear and anxiety, but then also steering him towards a more positive outlook?
Yeah. Sometimes it's difficult, because it it can almost be like a repetitious thing, that where you're constantly, having to say, we're going to believe that it's not going to come back, or, you're fine, honey, everything is good today. Why don't we do so and so, so and so? Let's go outside. Let's go to the grocery store, anything to try and get his mind off of it. So it's constantly for me trying to still be that humble and kind caregiver, trying not to sit there and think, oh, here we go. We're going to start with the fear thing today, or are we going to have the anxiety today? What is it that I may have to deal with?
Mm-hmm.
But mine is nothing compared to what he deals with. So, and that's how I put it into perspective. I put it into, okay, what if you were in his shoes?
Mm-hmm.
How would you want someone to respond to you? And that's how I try and deal with it every day, is just to be, okay, I want to be the spouse that I would want if I were in his shoes.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I love you putting on those lenses of trying to see through his point of view. That's
Yeah.
very selfless and a very beautiful thing. So, we've talked quite a bit about how you help Miles and how he's dealt with this process and kind of what it was like for you in the hospital. I would love to hear more. Hold on, gotta catch my breath. With pause the symbol up and down, your heart rate's like bam.
Yes.
um, but I would love to hear more about just the reality that you're human. You're
Mhm.
his caretaker, but you're human, and like you expressed, sometimes it's difficult because in reassurance with his emotions, it can feel repetitive, and with the every day is so unexpected, you don't know, how he's going to be that day. Yeah, I'm just curious, how has all of this impacted you since the change in onset of his GBS? And I would also love to hear more about how you cope with that change. And maybe if you guys, I'm not sure if you guys have any boundaries set. Like, I'm not sure if there's like days that maybe he feels like he needs something from you and you're like, listen, I can't reassure you today. Or I don't know if there's like I know that, you can't, you're kind of in the chair most of today. I understand that, but I need some alone time. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I would just love to hear how you take care of yourself as the caretaker.
Well, I think my running helps. I start my morning, running. It gives me a lot of time to be in constant prayer with God and to listen to sermons that I may want to listen to or speakers or whatever. And I think that helps set my mood a lot of times. Now, some mornings, if I've had a bad night's sleep as well, and he's just like, I'm just going to sit in the chair today, part of me wants to say, but I've got so much I need to do today. I thought we would do this and I thought we would do that, but I don't say it. I'm like, okay, if that's what you need to do, then that's fine. But I'm still going to do the things that, I had planned to do today. We used to do a lot of walking with the dogs and hiking with the dogs. Well, we don't do that much anymore because though his cycling is taking up a lot of his time because he can be gone, 3 to 4 hours during the middle of the day. He will only ride during the day when it's warm. He can't handle the cold anymore. And so he rides once it starts warming up. So that is almost like in the middle of the day. So by the time he gets back and he showers and all of that, it's the afternoon. And so then it's like, okay, well, I have to start dinner now you know? So it's like my day is staying home, taking care of the dogs, which I can leave them, for a while to go to the grocery store or whatever. But, I feel bad because they're in the house all day and not getting their exercise like they did before. And so I try and take them on walks, try and get them out and let them play. And then, like I said, by the time he gets back, it's time for me to start dinner, you know.
Yeah.
So, it's just a juggling act that I do more so now than I guess I did before because before, you know, we would just get out and go and do whatever. But if he's having a bad day and he just wants to sit in his chair, then okay, that's fine. That's what we'll do. I never get upset with him about that because again, as I said before, I want to be the spouse that I would want if I were in his shoes
Oh.
you know so my day-to-day things maybe have changed some but not a whole lot. They really haven't. One thing that I have noticed is that he was always so jovial, just such a jovial happy go person. And I have noticed that some of that he's still Miles. He's still jovial, but I have noticed that it's not as much maybe as it
Yeah.
used to be.
Mhm.
And I think, a lot of it is from, the stress and the fear of GBS coming back. And then when he gets home from these long bicycle rides, I know he's tired as well.
Mm.
So there are, factors that are playing into that. But that is one thing I think that I really have noticed more so
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah. So kind of some unpredictability. And I want to thank you so much for, yeah, just, kind of admitting the humanness and the having to adjust day to day with, oh, okay, you have to be in the chair today. So maybe that means that something we were planning on doing together or chores we were planning on getting done together, whatever. Now I'm kind of going to have to do solo. And I really appreciate you just talking about, yeah, I think just the humanness of, even though it's not his fault, of course, and of course he's not being, intentionally trying to get out of things, there's some disappointment in that, and I'm sure there's some grief and sadness in watching too, some of feeling, as if like maybe a bit of his light has faded. And
Yeah.
as you said, like, you're trying to be the spouse that you can be for him. So you don't fault him for that. You're not mad at him for that. But it's okay to grieve some of those things that you didn't used to have to grieve, you know.
Right,
So
right. That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really appreciate your honesty with that, and also your resilient love and, loving Miles through all of this, and your compassionate heart that's very Christ-like, I think, to instead of immediately, maybe saying like, but I was wanting to do this today or whatever, instead you take the selfless road and just choose to trust him and choose to give him that, time and space that he needs.
That is true, and who knows? I mean, down the road when he has not had GBS to come back,
Mm.
that maybe, his jovialness will, come back a little more. And maybe the nerve pain that he has will eventually, slowly start, going away a little bit. So these are things that we're hopeful for, that we hope that down the road, the nerve pain will lessen some, the fatigue will lessen as well. But you never know. You never know with GBS because there's just not that much awareness out there about it. I
Yeah.
mean, when we left the hospital, we still didn't really fully understand what was going on with him, you know? And so,
Yeah.
again, the purpose of what he's trying to do is one of the main reasons is to make awareness, of GBS, for people to know more about it.
Hmm. And you seem equally as passionate about that, which is so
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, I really do because I don't want someone to go through what we went through because it's not out there. There's not a lot of patients with GBS. So it's not like, and I hate to say, but it's not like cancer or heart, issues or things like that. It's something that there's so few patients with it that there's just not an awareness of it. And so getting that out there so that even one person, can find out about it. I mean, Miles has been distributing pamphlets and paperwork all over this county, not to mention a couple of other counties to neurology offices, to medical offices, to wherever he can take these pamphlets and put the information out there so that even the doctors who haven't seen it in 5 years know what it's about, because I don't think they are able to touch on that a whole lot in medical school, 'cause there's so much for them to have to take in.
Right. Hmm.
And I just feel like that GBS just it needs to get out there. People need to be aware, if your spouse or your mother or your dad or somebody starts having some of these symptoms, you can immediately say, "Oh, I heard a podcast about something like this. I wonder if this could be it." And you go to the hospital and say, "Can you please check for GBS?" And of course, the way to do that is with a spinal tap.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Jeez.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And what was the IV that helped him?
It's called IVIG plasma. And that is what goes in, to best my understanding, it goes back in and starts healing up these nerve fibers, because what GBS does, it's an autoimmune syndrome that attacks the immune system in your body. It starts eating away at the sheaths that surround your nerves, and so once those sheaths are away, that's what happens. Then your nerves, that's where the paralysis and all that stuff comes in. And so the IVIG plasma comes in when they start administering that and starts helping to somewhat heal these sheaths around the nerves that have been destroyed.
Wow. I'm s-
Yeah, that stuff is a lifesaver, and that's why plasma donations are so important. It's so important that people donate plasma. But I heard the other day where they are, what was it? I heard that they're coming up with some way to artificially make the plasma so that they don't have to rely on humans or people to give plasma. So that would be a major breakthrough if
Mhm.
they did something like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
dude, that'd be awesome.
yes,
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that information about GBS. I love that it seems, you guys have a passion to share that information to spare some people, the time and the pain that you guys went through. And so thanks for doing that. It's awesome. So I'm curious, obviously, through this experience, you've learned a bit of advocacy, with
yes.
GBS. So I'd love to hear some more of what you've learned while, as being a caretaker, since things have changed. What do you think are some things that God is teaching you?
Patience, understanding, how to be humble, and more so of how of relying on Him, you know. And that's the thing, for caregivers, sometimes it can be very frustrating. Mine, maybe not so much, but I went through with my mom and my dad. My dad had dementia, and being a caregiver for him, and the stress and, the emotions that were in that, and seeing how my mom, bless her heart, could get really upset sometimes, with my dad. And during that, I thought, I would never do that. I'll never do that. I could never get upset with someone who is going through a chronic illness or anything like that. And so, in a way, it's almost like going through that with my mom and dad prepared me for where I am today.
Wow.
It it prepared me to be humble and kind and, to do whatever you can to make them comfortable and to help alleviate what pain they may have or whatever they need, A lot of times if Miles has got nerve pain going on, can I get you a gabapentin? Because that's what they take, to help with a little bit of the pain. And he doesn't like to take any medicine at all. And so, and he's like, no, no. I'm like, well, honey, by not taking it, it puts more stress on you. It puts more stress on your body. Whereas if you take this, it kind of eases that pain and causes less stress on you. So,
Hmm.
just doing things like that, just being, the person that you would want, someone to be to you if you, were in that situation, how you would want them to react to whatever, is going on, at that time. So just and I know it's difficult. I know as a caregiver it's difficult. Some days are worse than others, but when it is someone that's close to you and your family or your spouse, I mean, just loving them, just letting them know that you're there for them is the main thing that, that I can say to a caregiver who maybe is going through a difficult time. I always, with something, like this, I always tell God, I am your vessel. You use me to say what it is that you want to say, maybe to that one caregiver that's out there who is just very emotional and very tired and just worn out. Just a word of kindness or just hearing me say, get in a little quiet corner and just get on your knees and just lay it at the altar, lay it at God's feet and say, I can't do this. So I'm giving it to you and letting you do it, letting you handle this, you know? So that's to me, that's how, I did that first night when I came home, after I called everyone that on my prayer warriors. I got on my knees and I said, Lord, I cannot deal with this. I can't. I give it to you, and I'm leaving it at your feet.
Mm.
And I did.
So for you, it was super important to, like you said, literally posture yourself for prayer and just
Yes.
admit to God, this is too much for me. I can't do this,
Yes.
so I need your help. I need you to do this for me. I need you to comfort Miles for me and give
Yes.
me the
Yes.
strength. And also
Yes.
reaching out to other like-minded people that would pray for
Yes.
you and be there for you.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes. And and I have, some family. My sister is close by, and she is the one that is married to the doctor, and she's a doctor as well. They're both radiologists, but my sister has retired. And so my brother-in-law is still working. So, having him there to be able to come in, and look at Miles's chart, and tell us something in layman's terms, that maybe the doctor came in and said, and Miles and I are looking at each other like, what does that even mean? And then to have, a family member as my brother in law to come in and say, well, this is what it means. I mean, that was a blessing within itself right there. And that's the thing too with caregivers, when you are, the one that is going to be taking care of this person when you bring them home, find out all that you can before you leave. And I know, like us, we didn't even know really what to ask because it was
Right,
GBS.
exactly.
You didn't know what to ask. You didn't know what really to expect. Unlike if someone has had heart problems, you kind of know. No stress. Let them relax when they get home. Blah blah blah. But with GBS, we knew nothing except a little bit that we had learned in the hospital. And so, I just encourage caregivers to find out all that you can, before you leave the hospital. And then when you get home, research it. Do research too, like we did to find out more about what's going on because knowledge is powerful. The more you know about something, the better care you can give someone as well.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you. That's a good reminder for us who are patients as well to not give up in our search and trying to improve our lives the best we can. So, thanks for that
Yes,
encouragement to do research.
absolutely,
And in a way
absolutely.
that's advocating for ourselves too, I suppose, isn't
Yes,
it?
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I think my one of my last questions for you would be when Miles is having a rough day emotionally or physically, but in this case, I think particularly when he's struggling with the anxiety, how do you differentiate your emotions from his? So let's say he's having a pretty rough day with anxiety. You've kind of done what you can to, encourage him. How do you allow yourself to have a good day, even if he's having a bad day?
I think I'm one of these people that stay busy all day, always doing something. Miles is always saying, "Can you not just sit down? Can you not just rest?" But I'm one of these people, and I've always been that way, where I'm just constantly doing something. So I just busy myself. I busy myself and not try not to let anything get to me. I just try and stay busy. I love to bake. So I may get in the kitchen and lo and behold, we have a ton of cookies, you know? Yeah, or something like that. Or I take the dogs out for a nice walk when it's a beautiful day, just to calm myself down if I'm feeling anxious because he's anxious. Because I hate when he's anxious because there's nothing I can do. Nothing I can do to take that away from him. And he hates it. He says, I hate it so much. I hate the fatigue. I hate it all. But there's nothing he can do about it. So, there's nothing that I can do for him. So if he just wants to sit in that chair and watch TV or read or whatever he wants to do, then that's fine. then, I will find something to keep me busy. Even if I want to read, I may decide to sit down and read with him, you know? But for me, it's just staying busy. It's just constantly finding an outlet of something, to do. I may go and visit my mom, or I may decide I might want to go shopping or something, So that's how I deal with it. I'm just constantly going and doing and, just try and not let it get to me, I guess.
Kind of finding things that you enjoy and keeping yourself
Yes,
in momentum.
yes,
Gotcha.
exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think our last question today would be for all the caretakers out there listening, what would be one word of encouragement you would have for them?
I know it's difficult and it's not something that you probably plan to happen in your life, but neither did the patient. The patient didn't plan it either. So I would say just again, be humble and kind and loving to that person, even when the days are tough. Just remember that they didn't plan for this. This is not what they wanted for their life. And that, if it gets too much and you need to seek counseling, whether it be, at a health facility or whether it be at your church or a friend, even a friend, sometimes just talking about it to someone, I think can help relieve maybe some of the anxiety or the stress that, the caregiver may have because it's psychologically stressing on the caregiver just like it is on the patient. But again, I have to keep telling myself, my husband didn't ask for this. So, what can I do to make his life easier?
Yeah. Thanks, Cindy. I appreciate that. Thanks for that wise word of encouragement.
Uh, I hope that it does encourage someone, and you know, I don't know how this would work, but I would be open to anyone, having questions if there's ever someone who has a question, about it or just needs someone to talk to, I
Oh,
mean, to offer a word of encouragement to them.
yeah.
I would be happy to do that as well.
Yeah. If you'd like, I could put your email in the show notes if that would
Sure,
work for you. Okay.
sure.
Thanks for
Yeah.
that. That's so sweet.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and I didn't realize that you had a chronic illness.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
I'm sorry, sweetheart.
That's
So,
all right. Thank you so much for your perspective. It's helpful. I have a husband, and so it's helpful hearing, where he might be coming from someday. I mean, right now he's pretty well adjusted, but someday I'm sure it'll wear on him. So yeah.
well, as it would anyone,
Yeah, of course.
um, but again, when you love someone, you do what you got to do.
Yeah.
You be there for them. If it's nothing but to sit there with them and hold their hand.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Sometimes that may be all they need. It's just for you to hold their hand.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Cindy. I really appreciate you being on the show, and I hope that
Absolutely.
everyone listening, I'm sure that it was encouraging to many caretakers. So thanks for sharing your story.
Oh, absolutely, sweetie.
Thank you so much for being a part of the Christians with Chronic Illnesses community. Please remember to follow, rate, and subscribe to the show. You can also follow us on our socials at CWCI Podcast. And if you're interested in sharing your story, please email us at cwcipodcast@gmail.com. If you are interested in contributing to the production of Christians with Chronic Illnesses, please see the show notes below for subscriptions starting as low as $1 a month, or email us for a more direct way to give. This show is hosted and produced by Ellie Sprague, and our incredible logo, thumbnail, and overall CWCI artist is Brianna Middleton. This show is intended for entertainment and encouragement purposes only. Please talk to your doctor before trying anything you hear on this show. Until next Monday. I present to you The Supernatural Case of an Accidental Time Traveler by my husband, Paul J. Trumba. It's a super interesting book. I'm not even much of a reader, but I read through this thing pretty easily. It's pretty large print, and it's about 500 pages. You can find it on Amazon. It's about Lou Barrett, who suddenly finds himself in London in the 1800s. He has no idea how he got there, and he goes on to form a really hilarious and cute relationship with a witch, a wizard, and a brawler, and they go on to fight supernatural evils together. I highly recommend. It's definitely for mature readers, but it's a really good book, and you can find it on Amazon. Again, that's The Supernatural Case of an Accidental Time Traveler by Paul J. Trumba.